December 31st, 1932. This fall brings national elections once again, and for the first time in several years, the Nazi Party is actually losing support. Have they run out of steam? Has Hitler's image started to fade? Have President Hindenburg and Chancellor von Papen managed to hold him back? There are so many questions to answer, so let's get to it. I am Indy Nidell, and welcome to the Weimar Wire, now a quarterly look at what is happening in Germany and around the world. Over the summer, political violence kept growing before the National Reichstag elections. It grew so much that Chancellor Franz von Papen used it as an excuse for his national government to take direct control of the state of Prussia, the last stronghold of German democracy. The elections themselves were a big win for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. And yet, when the Reichstag met, von Papen dissolved it and called for new elections, now in November, and ruled by decree with support from President Paul von Hindenburg. If you have been following this series, you will know that some episodes focus on politics, some on events in the streets, and sometimes even foreign policy comes first. Today is politics, politics, and more politics. Since the political moves this fall are crazy, we are going to have even more elections. After a total of 4 elections during 1932, the National Socialists were feeling gloomy as the campaign for the 5th one began. Constant campaigning had badly drained NSDAP finances. In a speech to the Reich Propaganda Conference on October 6th, Hitler tried to fire up party workers for the coming election, saying, "We National Socialists will give the nation an unmatched display of our strength of will. I lead this struggle with complete confidence. Let the battle begin. In 4 weeks, we will come out victorious." On October 11th, Adolf Hitler takes his 4th flight over Germany in 6 months to campaign. This time, he visits no fewer than 50 cities and towns, giving up to 3 speeches a day with his election slogan, "Down with reactionaries." His crowds are smaller than they were over the summer, though, and sometimes Hitler's supporters are even bussed in to make them bigger. He keeps his eye on von Papen, whom he calls a chancellor without a people, which is actually kind of true. Von Papen has support from literally no one in the country except Hindenburg. Hitler makes very clear in his speeches why he did not accept von Papen's offer to join his cabinet back in August. He says he did not want to get on a train that he would only get off a few months later. And he did not support the actions of the reactionaries driving the train. He's not the kind of guy who joins one coalition after another. He wants full power. That is it. Full power, nothing less. On October 12th, von Papen gives a campaign speech that gets a lot of attention, in which he promises constitutional reform. He wants to set up an authoritarian, nonpartisan state system, saying that the government should be independent of political parties, independent of parliament. To balance one-sided decisions by the Reichstag based on party interests, Germany needs a special first chamber with clearly defined authority and strong lawmaking powers. If this sounds like von Papen saying he wants to legally destroy parliamentary democracy in Germany, that is because he is. The elections are on November 6th, at the 60-day maximum time limit for holding new elections after the Reichstag was dissolved in September. There is something big that happens a few days before that. The Berlin Transport Company has imposed wage cuts, and on November 3rd, the city's transport workers go on strike, bringing the city to a complete standstill, paralyzing it. The strike is, of course, supported by the KPD, the Communist Party. Here is the thing, though. It is not supported by the trade unions, nor by the Social Democrats, which surprises many people, who ask the workers to accept an arbitration agreement and go back to work. You know what surprises even more people? The strike does have the support of the Nazi Party. Yep, Hitler announces their support. I am pretty sure this is to try to win voters by showing off socialist credentials, but there is a big risk that it will push away middle-class voters. We saw last time that those were the party's bread and butter, and the party did not actually do that well at the polls among workers, especially unemployed workers in the big cities. So, it is a fine line to bring in new voters without pushing away old ones. It is probably also really strange when people see communists and Nazis on the same picket lines, considering all the street violence between them in the past couple of years. So, how snorts do the elections go? Well, voter turnout is down from the July elections to 80.6% of the electorate from 84.1%. I am guessing some people are tired of voting every few months, but 80% is still a lot. The results are a setback for Hitler and the Nazis, dropping from 37.3% to 33.1% of the vote, losing 2 million votes since July and 34 seats in the Reichstag. They still have 196, and they are still the largest party. But the seemingly unstoppable rise of Hitler in elections since 1930 had finally been stopped. Joseph Goebbels thought Hitler's decision not to enter Papen's government was the main reason for the loss of middle-class support. Local party reports confirmed this view, with one saying that the party leader does not know what he wants and has no program. Just as in July the vote moved away from the traditional middle-class parties, now there is a move back to them. The DNVP more than triples its share of the vote, getting 8.3% and 51 seats. The smaller DVP gets 11 seats, up 4, suggesting that traditional middle-class voters are going back to those traditional middle-class parties. The parties on the left, both snorts, win and lose. The Social Democrats lose 12 seats and now have 121, but they are still the second largest party, while the Communist Party keeps rising, gaining 11 seats to reach 100 exactly. They are now the third largest party, not all that far behind the Social Democrats, and their gains have mostly come at the expense of the Social Democrats. Voters who thought the SPD leadership was too weak for not being willing or able to stand up to the Prussian coup in the summer have switched to the Communists. So, how will this affect the Chancellor and his cabinet? Kurt von Schleicher, the man we have seen pulling strings in the background over the past year, and the man responsible for von Papen becoming Chancellor in the first place, proposes on November 17th that the whole von Papen cabinet resign, and then Hindenburg could take time to talk to all possible alternative candidates for Chancellor. Only 63 of the 585 members of the Reichstag actually support von Papen. When Papen talks to Hindenburg and tells him he wants to resign for failing, as he has tried to do for months, to unite the different right-wing parties into a majority coalition government of national concentration. Because of this, he knows very well that as soon as the Reichstag meets, someone is going to introduce a motion of no confidence in him. And it is going to pass. And then the Reichstag will be dissolved again. And then they will have to hold yet another national election. It just keeps going in circles. Hindenburg is a little surprised, but he does accept von Papen's resignation with the condition that he and his cabinet stay on as caretakers and help form the new government. He still has Hindenburg's complete confidence. Papen tells Hindenburg to ask Hitler to form a majority coalition of national concentration. Hindenburg then talks with Hitler on both November 19th and 21st. He does not only talk with Hitler, though. This is part of him talking with all the party leaders except the Communists and Social Democrats. Those two have made it very clear they are not interested at all. Anyhow, Hindenburg asks Hitler about trying to form a coalition government, like von Papen suggested. The thing is, Hindenburg says that if Hitler can manage to form a majority government, Schleicher has to stay on as Minister of Defense and Konstantin von Neurath as Foreign Minister. I do not think I mentioned it last time, but von Papen appointed him in June. Neurath was one of Schleicher's choices for cabinet positions for von Papen to appoint when he became chancellor. Hindenburg also says that national control of the state of Prussia, the biggest German state by far, which we saw happen over the summer, must be made permanent. Hindenburg also wants final approval over Hitler's choices for the rest of his cabinet. That is asking a lot. I think at the meetings, though, Hitler accepts these conditions, but then on the 23rd, he writes to Hindenburg saying that he has not been able to form a coalition, and he asks Hindenburg to make him chancellor anyway, giving him full presidential powers and also allowing him to pass an enabling act after, which he would be able to rule without the approval of either the president or the Reichstag, basically giving him total power. Hindenburg sends him a letter back the next day saying that he is not going to give Adolf Hitler complete presidential powers. Music. Since the Nazi Party always says it wants exclusive rule, and he thinks a Hitler-led government would become a one-party dictatorship. This is not exactly new. It is pretty much the same thing he told him when they met in August. Hitler thinks, these talks are just a sham anyway, and Hindenburg wants to keep von Papen as chancellor, and Hitler is kind of right. Hindenburg asks for another meeting, and Hitler says, no, he does not see the point. So, is von Papen going to be chancellor again? Who else would it be? Well, there is von Schleicher himself. He actually asks Hitler at one point if he would be in a Schleicher-led cabinet, and Hitler says, no way, not a chance. Hindenburg invites Papen and Schleicher to both meet with him on December the 1st at the presidential palace. At this meeting, Papen suggests something pretty radical when Hindenburg asks him what he thinks they should do. Papen tells him Hitler had refused all possible parliamentary combinations, meaning the only way to bring him into government was to offer him the post of chancellor, supported by full presidential powers. But he felt that was too risky. Papen now offered a drastic solution, suggesting that he should remain chancellor for the time being under a, quote, state of emergency. He would then carry out a dictatorial fighting program that would involve getting rid of the Reichstag, using the army to crush the Communist and National Socialist parties, and forcing through a new constitution, which would be put to the German people in a referendum or submitted to a new National Assembly. Papen also made clear that refusing or delaying an election for any length of time would mean Hindenburg was breaking the current constitution. In essence, Papen was asking Hindenburg to create a full-blown dictatorship backed up by the Reichswehr. Schleicher says that would be pretty risky. I mean, if Hindenburg does this, declaring a military emergency and breaking the Constitution, he really does risk impeachment and a two-thirds majority in the Reichstag removing him from office. Hindenburg can do the math and says, yeah, that really might happen. What else could they do? Schleicher says, well, why not make me chancellor? And I could get Gregor Strasser and a breakaway group of left-leaning Nazis who are unhappy that the party is giving up real socialist principles. They also do not like Hitler's all-or-nothing plan. And if they join Schleicher, he could probably reach across the political spectrum and make a coalition, and then run a program to reduce unemployment and boost the depressed economy. Papen says, wait a second, that is a return to the full parliamentary system. But what Hindenburg wants is a stronger presidential system independent from parliament, right? That is the opposite. Hindenburg listens to all of this, thinks for a minute, then stands up and says he is going with Franz von Papen and his proposal. If you think Schleicher is just going to go along with this and accept political defeat after all we have seen of Schleicher, you are very much mistaken. That was December 1st. Yeah. The very next day there is a cabinet meeting, and Papen gives his cabinet an account of the meeting with Hindenburg. Defense Minister Schleicher is there, of course, and he has a report with him. It is the report of a war game carried out by Eugen Ott for the Department of Defense to find out if the Reichswehr, the German armed forces, would be able to control a civil uprising by both the Nazis and the Communists at the same time and still defend the Polish border. Ott had concluded that, no, the Reichswehr could not keep order in such a situation. Schleicher says such a situation could very well happen if Hindenburg declares Papen's state of emergency. I mean, look at the transport strike last month. That was communists and Nazis on the same side. It could happen again. Here is another good quote from that McDonough book. Really good writing style. Worth getting. The impact of the report and Schleicher's follow-up argument proved decisive. A clear majority of the cabinet felt Schleicher was right and that he should be given the chance to rule in agreement with the Reichstag rather than going down the unconstitutional road of declaring a state of emergency. Papen felt Schleicher had stabbed him in the back, but he was wrong. Schleicher had stabbed him in the front. After the meeting, Papen went straight to the presidential palace to report on the cabinet meeting. Papen said the president could keep him in office, but in that case, he wanted to sack Schleicher as defense minister, as he could not work with him any longer. The alternative was for Hindenburg to call on Schleicher to become the new German chancellor. There was a long silence before Hindenburg said, "You will think me a scoundrel, my dear Papen, if I change my mind now, but I am too old to take on the responsibility for a civil war at the end of my life. So, in God's name, we must let Herr von Schleicher try his luck." So on December 3rd, Kurt von Schleicher becomes the third German chancellor of 1932. You know who actually predicted Schleicher pulling something like this? Sort of the Nazis. They had dealt with the general for some time and knew what to expect from him. Any chancellor who has Herr von Schleicher on his side must expect sooner or later to be sunk by the Schleicher torpedo, wrote Göring. There was a joke going around in political circles. General von Schleicher really ought to have been an admiral because his military genius lies in shooting underwater at his political friends. Schleicher is pretty much unknown to the general public. He has always been the master of backstage politics, more like, but now he is on the national stage. He also has even less support in the Reichstag than von Papen. Hindenburg also keeps von Papen on as a personal advisor and lets him keep his government apartment to keep him close by. He sends Papen a signed photo with the tagline, "I had a comrade, a friend." Well, what about Schleicher's government, you may ask? It is military. The most military government Weimar has ever had. Field Marshal Hindenburg as president, General von Schleicher as chancellor, and Reich Commissioner for Prussia, which means also running the nation's biggest police force, and so on down. Schleicher actually keeps most of von Papen's cabinet, which is not much of a surprise since he chose them in the first place. There are 4 new faces, though, 3 of them independents. Friedrich Syrup, Labor Minister, Franz Bracht, Minister of the Interior, and Johannes Popitz, Minister without portfolio. And one man from the Christian National Peasants and Farmers Party, Günther Gericke, the new Reich Commissioner for Employment. That party, interestingly enough, had just been thrown out of the Reichstag in the November elections, getting no seats. How do Hitler and the Nazis feel about Schleicher as chancellor? They meet on December 5th to talk about it. Joseph Goebbels writes, Strasser takes the position that Schleicher must be tolerated. The Führer had fierce clashes with him. Strasser, as always in recent times, paints the situation of the party in the blackest colors. Strasser tries to bring those present at the Führer conference over to his side. All, however, stand firmly on the side of the Führer. And they do, with Hitler declaring there will be no cooperation with the new government. The newly elected Reichstag meets for the first time the next day, the 6th. As in September, Hermann Göring is elected as Speaker. He gives an opening speech that right away questions Schleicher's fitness to be Chancellor. Schleicher has no parliamentary support, and on top of that, he is an army officer, and Göring says the army should stay above politics and political fights. Then the Reichstag gets to work. The first motion is from the Social Democrats, calling on the government to make its declaration of policy. This is traditional. The second is sponsored by the Communists and is a motion of no confidence, as expected. Göring does not allow either one to be put to a vote, though. The Nazis do not want another dissolved Reichstag and another costly campaign that might cost them even more seats. The Nazis then do manage to introduce and pass a bill declaring the president of the Supreme Court acting president if the actual president dies. Hindenburg is in his mid-80s, and this is aimed at Schleicher because the former law gave those powers to the chancellor. The Reichstag meets for 3 days, then it is adjourned until what will likely be mid-January 1933. Guess what, though? Whatever happens now with the Nazis, it will be without Gregor Strasser. On December 8, 1932, he resigns from all of his posts within the Nazi Party. He writes a resignation letter to Hitler that says, among other things, that Hitler's insistence on chancellor or nothing would lead to nothing, to the party becoming irrelevant. Interestingly enough, Strasser writes that he has no intention at all of leading an opposition movement within the party, and he never has. Remember Schleicher telling Hindenburg he could get them to join him. Turns out Strasser never considered this. There is an article called The Myth of Chancellor von Schleicher's Querfront Strategy from Central European History, Volume 41. Querfront means cross-front and refers to cooperation between far-left and far-right, or nationalist and socialist ideas. Right? The article says the minutes of Schleicher and Strasser's talks are forgeries. Stuff about Schleicher offering the vice-chancellorship to Strasser also seems to be made up. Schleicher is going to Schleicher, I guess. But in any and all cases, Strasser has taken himself off the board. Schleicher also gets a foreign policy success. A few days later, on the 11th, Britain, France, Italy, the US, and Germany recognize Germany's right to equality in armaments. He did not expect this very welcome news, but he gives a radio address on the 15th to tell the nation about it, and also tells them not to think of him as a soldier, but as a trustee acting in everyone's interest. He says he is neither socialist nor capitalist, and neither private, business nor state control scares him. He also lays out his program. It is focused on giving work to the unemployed. He wants to lower prices on necessities like bread, milk, or coal. And he also wants to suspend the courts that deal with political terrorism, reduce the punishments for disturbing the peace in general, and so increase freedom of speech and assembly, which would likely all lead to a big rise in political violence. Schleicher pushed Papen out with the War Games report after pushing him in over the summer, after pushing Brüning out as chancellor, and even pushing out his old mentor Groner. But there is someone else, it seems, who is able to maneuver: Franz von Papen. It was indeed a matter of great tragedy for Germany that at this fateful moment in her history, the handling of her destiny should have been at the mercy of the capricious rivalry of two such men as Franz von Papen and Kurt von Schleicher. Never had the national interest of the Reich been served so badly as at this time, when political incompetence went hand in hand with personal bitterness. There is a private men's club in Berlin where the aristocratic elite meet to, well, network. Von Papen gives a speech there on the 16th. He says any workable government coalition must include the Nazi Party, and he demands that Hitler be part of the cabinet. Die-hard Hitler supporter Kurt von Schroeder, a financier who runs a group that raises funds for the Nazis, is there to hear the speech, and he talks to von Papen afterward. When Papen tells him that Hindenburg does not really have confidence in Schleicher, Schroeder says, "Why doesn't von Papen meet with Hitler about forming a government?" Von Papen says he already did that a while ago, and it did not work, but sure, he can try again. Schroeder gets word to Hitler, who says, "Okay, let's meet." He tells Schroeder they should do it at Schroeder's house in Cologne on January 4th. After Christmas, von Papen is at his estate in the Saar. Side note, there are still League of Nations troops from Italy, Sweden, and the UK stationed in the Saar after the Great War. I am pretty sure, though, that the general public wants to be reunited with Germany and not ruled under the current British-French mandate. But a plebiscite is scheduled for 1935, and we will see how they vote then. Anyhow, on the 28th, December 28th, von Papen gets a phone call from Schroeder asking if January 4th in Cologne is okay. And von Papen says, "Well, I am going to Berlin that day, but I can stop in Cologne on the way." He will give this explanation for the meeting. The answer is simple. The NSDAP had 196 Reichstag seats and remained a major political force under the Schleicher government. I still had serious doubts whether Schleicher would ever succeed in splitting the party. I thought there was still a possibility of persuading Hitler to join the Schleicher government. If that is really the case, then you would think he might definitely mention the meeting to Schleicher, but he does not. However, in reality, Papen saw his coming meeting with Hitler in January 1933 as a way to get revenge on Schleicher for causing his own fall. Hitler's own reason for accepting the invitation to meet Papen was his reluctant acceptance that the party was heading down a blind alley if it could not gain power. A meeting with Papen offered him a real chance to finally gain the chancellorship, as he thought Papen was the best person to break down Hindenburg's reluctance to offer him the role. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we find ourselves on New Year's Eve 1932, with Franz von Papen and Adolf Hitler about to meet again in just a few days. The former with revenge in mind to bring down Schleicher, and the latter seeing a real chance to finally take power. You cannot make this stuff up. It is like those daily Chicago radio programs full of drama, made for housewives with soap commercials before them, but taken to a level no one ever dreamed of. The elections, the intrigue, the violence, the manipulations, the backroom deals, the non-stop chase for power. It is all just getting bigger and bigger. Whatever happens in 1933, I have a feeling it will be as stormy and as shocking as 1932. Another year has come and gone, both 1932 and 2025. I do hope, wherever you are, that as 2026 really gets going, you find yourself well. We shall continue to do what we do in 2026, as we have since 2014, week by week by week, covering the many conflicts we cover. We do that thanks to the Time Ghost Army. They make it possible for us to do all that we do. To be part of this, join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Dave Tier, or Ty, is the Army Member of the Week, and these are the newest commissioned officers. Do not forget to subscribe. Excelsior.